Hey everyone, hi, Snail Snape, and I'm gonna go through a color beauty picture again. This time I'll try to make it a little bit quicker than the other times, and let's get started. So the first thing I always do is look at the images, select my images, give them stars, and give them ratings. These ones have already been done, and on the screen you'll see in front of you that I have a picture that's it's already has its values inset into the raw image, and that is by I had two color filters. The one on the darker side of the face is not very apparent, and so we're going to try to increase that a little bit. So what we do is I'm already in the develop module. I'm just going to well, I'll make a virtual copy, and that way I already have one made with no settings, so later on I'll be able to show that to you a lot faster and easier. So I'm just going to move on up and selection a little bit into change the tones. Now I could easily click on the white balance and set this to gray, which give it a tiniest bit of difference. There's not much at all. Or I can manually move this around, and since it was done by flash, this is a flash photography with no daylight, I can actually change the white point, which is the tint. So it's the values of color in the whites and the overall color temperature, and I can make it a little bit cooler and see what happens. If I go warmer, it's going to pick up quite a bit more color in the skin tones, maybe a little bit too much yellow. It's not bad, but somehow I think that a lot of fashion pictures, especially when it's done with flash, lend themselves to just a little bit cooler than 5000K temperature lights. So there I've turned that one down a little bit, which is different than if I re-clicked with the white eyedropper. Now, as far as the tone goes, I can set my cursor over any values, and off to the right in the histogram, as I'm doing that, you'll have to look up on the right, you have the values in LEB, and there it's showing me it's very bright, but there is still some information left in it, which is fine. I find that it's a little bit too bright. Now there is a way to tell you if there are any areas that are blown out or not, and you press the J key, and you'll see that the two end points of clipping markers, they actually will show you if there is any clipping that's outside of the range of the image. Now those clipping indicators are approximative, and it will show you with all three channels. There's not one individual channel. So sometimes you'll have just one channel that's clipping and not the others, and it'll still show. In this case, there's nothing there, so I'll press J again, and it will turn off the clipping indicators. I do think that it's too bright up here, so I can do many things, starting with I can actually take down my highlight value, and I can see what it does to the image, and I think that's a little bit better. It brings more detail back in again. By doing that though, I've also increased, decreased the actual highlight values everywhere in the image, which includes the bottom. The way I'd want to move that back up again before I start anything else on this image, I can actually go to the brush tool, I can select highlights, and I can turn the highlights down. I could set it to just selection with the auto mask for just the highlights, and yet since the hair that's in the back, it's not going to hurt it if it actually has some in there. Auto mask unfortunately has quite a harsh system of finding edges, and so it'll pixelate along jaggy edges, and it's not really professional if you're doing that. You can use it on soft selections such as a background, but when you're selecting in skin tones with hair, then it will make it quite a bumpy edge with jaggies all the way around. So that way I've just turned that down a little bit, and I can actually even turn down the whites a little bit too. You can see what's happening. But by turning it down too much, I'll just introduce gray. I can't pull the curves back so far that I'm actually going to recover detail. This type of operation would probably be better in Capture One. It has more latitude and is more flexible in recovery. Now that that's done, we're going to click off on the brush and go back to the the main panel, and we're going to start to play with things like exposure. So we're going to see what happens if it goes lighter. If you go lighter, you probably end up with less retouching to do, but I think the exposure is good where it is. Contrast. If I change the contrast, I can make it a little bit smoother, and yet it loses the charm of the image. Now what I could do is locally brush in, so reduce the contrast overall, just a little bit, and later on, then I can brush in the highlights on this side. As far as shadows go, shadows is the one that pulls up the shadows, but it also increases grayness. So that one, you have to be careful that you don't go overboard, because if you go to 100% view or 1:1, you'll find that the shadows themselves, if you push up too high, they will actually, it'll become quite noisy. So you don't want to do that. You want to just make subtle moves with it. We'll go back to fit. Fit mode, whites. We're going to play a little bit with the whites. It looks pretty good. I like it just I'm not sure. That's what I like about Lightroom. It's totally visual. You only have to play with it until you're happy, and when you know you have it, it's good. Whatever's good to your eye is good for your image. Now, clarity is the only thing that I used to put a lot of clarity in, and I think a lot of photographers did, but truth is, clarity in Lightroom actually makes the image quite harsh. So I use it usually with less than 10, or I brush in locally, just for a little bit of clarity. Now, in this case, I might even double click on the word, and that takes it back to 0. Vibrance. Vibrance is going to take down the mid-tone saturation. So that one I'm being careful to not desaturate to the point where there's no more fun color left, and yet I don't want it too saturated that's going to create banding into the whites. So that one I might just probably take it down to around 5, which is fine. Now the bottom slider is saturation. That takes the extremities of color into certain ranges. If you go up a little bit, it's going to take the yellows up as well. It's not too bad, and this is a very highly colored image, so you could actually get by with running a little bit, a tiniest bit, like 5, or if you click in the field, you can use your arrow keys and take it back down to 3, and you're probably fine. Tone curve, I don't go into immediately, especially when it's black and white. I don't bother with tone curve until later. This time I will show you where I start. It's almost always a good idea to separate these sliders, depending on your image. But in beauty photography, you want to affect with the highlights and with the darks, the shadows, you want it to affect a smaller range. As I push over the slider, it actually divides up the start point for the zone that you're going to affect. So now when I change the highlights and take them up or take them down, it affects only the region that's shown in the indicator, which is now further along the scale and toward the top. Darks. I'm just going to play with that a little bit. And that will start to add a lot of contrast to the image, but will also make your eyes go just a tad dark. But I am going to take that one down. Lights. I can go back and I can make it look a little bit lively by adding some highlights, but I have to be careful not to blow at the top of the head. So if I take this one, I don't think I'm going to change it too much, and I'm going to just brighten it up later with the brush tool. Shadows. Shadows are, now that I've moved the slider over or divided up the start point, actually it's only going to affect the real blacks, and this image doesn't have many in the blacks, it's only around the eyes. So I think that one you're probably best to leave around where it is or 0. Color. Next one down. You can, with your color indicator, each slider, then you have your 3 values, HSL, and you can affect certain zones. You can't change the actual zone, they're already pre-built, hardwired into Lightroom, but you can see where it affects. So usually you start off with luminance, and you just give it a whack to see where those zones are living. So the reds are where it's changing rapidly. And I actually like it when it's a little bit lighter. I don't want it to be too dark. Just a little bit lighter. And then you can see, you can actually change the actual hue angle of it. If I go orangey, you don't really notice it too much. You even introduce a little bit of green. And yet when I go a little bit pinker, it really enhances that, the gel, which was a sort of a pink. I can't remember exactly what color it is. Saturation, you could increase it, but you will also start to make it a little bit crunchy. Now oranges, same thing, and you can see where it lives. So the freckles are in the oranges, and the detail on top of the head is in the oranges. So rather than going light, where it's going to turn very plastically, I will actually turn down the orange slider and actually have pulled back in a lot of detail. As far as the hue angle goes, I doubt that I'll change it because it's the right hue angle. I might, though, just decrease the saturation just a bit so that it's not too colored. Yellows. Yellows are usually in the hair and the very light zones. In this case, I don't think I'll change that at all. It's fine. Greens. This image doesn't have much in the way of green by what the sliders tell me. So I double click on the triangle or the luminance word or even the green slider and reset all three. Aqua. There's not much. A little bit in the background. So I like it a little bit lighter actually. Now, blues. How much blue is there? Quite a bit because the makeup actually has blues. And is it better when it's lighter? Yes, because that makes it a lot more lively, picks up in that eye. But I might saturate it. So there's to that one. Purples. So that's where all of the makeup is living, and plus a little bit to the left in the background. It's much better when it's lighter because it actually pulls in a lot of color. This is the one that you have to be really careful because you can see if I increase the lightness, yes, it works. It pulls up in the back where the filter is. The one thing is the eye, it starts to make banding in the color. So this one I can't change very much. If anything, it's going to be a small amount. That's all there is to that part. Now, what I like to do is also, in this type of image, actually add a bit of split toning. There is also a divider in it, which is called balance, and that's going to tell it to the left is the shadow side and to the right is the highlights. But the way you do it is when it's set to 0 saturation on either slider, that means there's nothing being applied. All that you have to do is turn up the saturation really high. That way you can pick the color you want. This would be just for shadows. And I'm going to see what happens if I go to a cooler zone. And I think that looks... I've always been a fan of the a little bit greenish colored blues, but you can see that that really destroys everything in skin tones. And that's because the saturation is 100. I'll take it back down to 0, and then I will just add it back in until it actually colors a little bit of shadows. Now, there are other ways of coloring just shadows as well, without maybe affecting the background. So we'll look at that approach as well, since this image is really quite simple to do. So instead of affecting midtones plus shadows with artificially coloring, we can go up to the tone curve, which is Command 2 if you want to make it faster. And instead of using the sliders, you actually click on this little box, and that'll bring up your curves. Now, if I wanted to change the amount of cyan in the shadows, actually we'll take I'll try first with the red channel, and then we'll actually click on the endpoint. These are really tricky in Lightroom to try and grab onto. And you can see if I take it up, it's actually going to put more red into the very beginning of the shadows overall. And if I take it the other way on the graph, you can see that it's adding that green into the shadows. It's also changing my background a lot, which if I want to do it manually, I can just click and add points, or I can pick on the target tool, click in here and say, there, I want more reds, and I'll take it back to where it was originally. There is the indicator on the top left of the tone curve panel, and it will show you when you're going to get back to where you were. It was at 64.7 at that particular point, so I'll take it to around exactly the same. So that way I've colored the shadows, but I haven't done anything else except for the shadow. Making sure in the middle that I haven't changed the midtones. Taking that one back up again, and we're good. We can go to the blue channel. We can play with that, see what's going to happen. Blue channel is probably not the one we want to use for this, and so we're going to say it's good. To get out of this box and get back to where we were, you just click on the box again. Now, the image is pretty much done. I can use the brush tool, so you can click on the tool itself, press K, and we're going to start off with, usually the first one, the best one to start off with is just exposure. It's always sticky for the last few settings, so it's at 0.10, which is not very much. I don't have auto mask turned on, which is a good thing. Sometimes I forget, more often than not. I forget after using it, and then I wonder why my mask is not complete and it's making jaggies. It's because you've left it on, that's all. So I'm just slowly lightening, and I can say, yeah, maybe I'll go faster with that, so I'll take that value up to 0.2. Yeah. Here, like that, I want that to be a little bit lighter. I'm going to just lighten up here, it's fine. And I think we're just about done. I'm going to paint 0.2 density onto the eyes on the top. I can't actually do the bottom of the eyes here without taking away the contrast, and naturally follow up a little bit further where the head is. Excellent. Now, the only other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a new one. But this time, I might take it down the other direction. So what I'm going to do is go to here, new, exposure, and I'm going to hit auto mask, but I'm going to take it down to around here. So I'm going to click in here, and anything under the middle of the cursor actually is selected. So I'm taking the contrast down of just that. Taking the exposure down, and then I'm going to increase the contrast, but not too much, otherwise it becomes very artificial. That's about all you need. Is there anywhere else that I might want to do that? Yeah, I'm going to do it right here. The arms to give it a little bit more, except now I'm going to uncheck auto mask. Anybody knows the shortcut for that one, please write it in the comments. I really don't know. I've never found it. And I'm very happy with that. I'm going to do one more, but this time it's going to be just exposure, down, make sure auto mask is off. And I'm going to darken the natural areas. Oops. Sometimes when you have it selected, and if you click on top of it, you can actually drag it around. Drag the pin around is actually going to change where that mask is. So you can actually accidentally move the entire mask, which is sometimes not what you want to do. So just know that it's possible to move the entire mask. If I want to burn there, I can just a little bit, but not so much that it's too artificial. Matter of fact, that's probably too much. So I'm going to turn off auto mask. Yeah, that time I noticed. And we're good. So the only other things I want to do is I'm going to do a contrast. I'm going to lower the contrast, lower the clarity, and I'm going to paint over this, because in the skin there's a lot of detail there that you don't really want. And to save yourself retouching time, just make it a little bit softer. And did I move my pen again? Yeah, it's okay. There too, I am going to actually make it softer. I can do in the neck, but in this case it's almost perfect. And that's about all you have to do to make a great image. If you wanted to add some more clarity, you could in this point. So let's try that. Clarity, increase clarity. Last Hue setting was decreased, and I'm just going to paint over this to sort of boost up the, it's like a sharpness, it's actually mid-tone gamma that you're increasing. That looks good to me. And my famous trick is I'll go to 1 to 1, add new, and I use the navigator to move around. And I'm going to change this one to Iris Dodge and Burn, which is a preset that I've saved. Anything after you change any one of these sliders, it'll say custom. After that, you can click on here, and you can save it as a preset. But since this one's already saved, I'm not going to change anything yet. It's one I use over and over and over again, just to change the actual eyes so they're brighter, without going to Photoshop. And in this case, it always depends on the image. Since this was carefully lit, that might be a little bit extreme. So what I'm going to do is just take the exposure down a little bit. The other settings I'll leave where they are. And that's all you have to do on this image. I think we're done. We're going to look at that. We might add, now that I'm at 100%, I will add one more. So I'm going to take this exposure up a little bit, and probably the contrast down a little bit, and I'm going to carefully brush on here, but I don't want to get the lighter area. So I'm going to do it a little bit slower. Now I could take the slider and do this, or you can, if you have a keyboard, of course you want 80, you press 8, and it goes directly to 80%. So you can see that's going to make it just a little bit easier for retouching. This type of image, if you do all that I've just done in Photoshop, in Lightroom, in Photoshop you will find it a lot faster and a lot quicker. Now, take that one down too. The only thing is that the lip color here is a little bit bright. If I wanted to change that, there is a way. So you click on New, and we can take down exposure, and after I can change the color here, saturation, etc. But since you can pick anything you want and change this one after the fact, it'll keep the mask, but it will change something else. So this time I definitely want the auto mask, and it won't pick the skin that's up here. It's only going to pick in here, what's underneath. If you want to see the mask, you press O. And since my mask is actually red, you probably didn't see much of a change, but it's actually there. So anything underneath the crosshairs will be picked up. You can see that it's it doesn't make a perfect mask. So if you really want to do an absolutely perfect mask, then you really need to use Photoshop. So if I turn off the mask, you'll see that, press O again. And here I can take the shadows down. I can take the exposure down overall. And that way I can increase the density. And if I really want to change the color, I can do either one of those. When I change a color like that, you can see where the mask missed the very bottom. I could click in Add More with a finer one. A little bit smaller brush sometimes can help you pick up those extra colors. But I don't want purple lipstick, so I'm going to click on this. I didn't mind it a little bit more purple. One thing is I'm really afraid it's going to mess up my... So a little bit more there. And you notice that it's definitely marked custom. Now if I wanted to save that as a preset, you just go down to the bottom and say Save Current as a preset with all the settings you have, and you can use it again and again and again. I think that's about all we're going to do. I'm just going to make sure that I've gone as far down as I possibly can, because otherwise you're going to have to add density with the stamp tool in darken mode from the skin that's below, sampled. That's about it. Perfect. Much better. Click on those. And you can see our image before and after. So we built up the contrast, we increased, brought in some density, changed the colors that were already existing in the shadows, because I had a filter on there, but we also increased the effect of that shadow. We didn't do it with split toning, we did it with the actual curves. We augmented the saturation on the side, changed a little bit densities, lightened just so slightly the eyes, add a little bit more clarity and reduce contrast in the hair, which makes it more lively. We added a little bit of clarity here, and we decrease the clarity on the side so you don't have to retouch as much. And what can I say but subscribe to my channel, and I'll get a new tutorial on how I do things every couple of weeks. Thanks again for watching, and see you soon.